which is you just get dabbling in games contract 2, so bang, you got your game on Steam, you got it greenlit, you got it launched. Fantastic. You're an inspiration.
Okay. Here's the talk telling you why I'm not.
Okay, so my name is Fisher, and I made a game. And that game... thank you. That game is called BRKÖUT. Or Breakout. Everybody just calls it Breakout. And that's fine. So for this presentation, I'm just going to call it Breakout because there's no point to call it the other name. Welcome. So I believe almost everyone in the room has played it, but if you haven't, too bad, spoilers. And if you're watching this online, stop watching.
Go buy it.
And go buy it. It's $2 or $3 if you buy it on Steam. And just play it. It's like an hour and a half. Okay. That said, let's get this show on the road. Let me see if I can get us to work here. Okay. So I decided to focus on where I failed first and foremost because I feel that's more valuable to other people who would be in my position.
Also more entertaining.
More entertaining, definitely. So ultimately, yeah. And here's 3 easy steps on how to do that. So let's get down to brass tacks here. I just want to get all the numbers and stuff out of the way first. So the game launched on Steam 1 month ago. Here's what a month of sales looks like. Yeah. So Valve doesn't like this very much, but here's also the total of units sold in a month at $2.99 a unit with a 16% launch discount that lasted a week. Overall, these numbers aren't terrible. More on that later. Before launching on Steam, Breakout was available on itch.io for a year in early access, and codes were sold physically at conventions as well, and at meetups to real people for cash. So these numbers are like sort of accurate. I didn't keep super accurate receipts, but sorry. Those downloads used itch.io servers, so it wasn't taxing anybody else.
How many conventions did you do?
Sorry?
How many conventions?
I only attended 2 conventions. Green Mountain Game Festival and then Vermont Comic Con. That's it. I just couldn't afford to go to any others. That's really it. So then there was Gamejolt. So I released on Steam, itch.io, and Gamejolt. Gamejolt was interesting. So they were really excited in my game when I originally posted about sending it to Gamejolt as a new sold option there. So I didn't ask for any of these features that they gave me. I got a front page feature. The Gamejolt Twitter tweeted about my game with a GIF or GIF or whatever. And I had a full fancy store presence, and I also had a sale going on at the same time. And I sold, drumroll please, 1 copy! Sold literally 1 copy. Yeah, hello, welcome. Come on in. Yeah, Gamejolt. I love it. It's a great platform. I had about 37 followers on the product, and it was very strange that none of them bought it. So I don't know what's up with that. Okay, so let's do some math. 77 plus 39 plus 14 plus 1 equals 131 total copies sold. That is not, you can't just apply it to $2 because I sold it on itch.io for a year at about $1 and then like $1.25, $1.50. I did it the Minecraft way where you pay for early access in phases. Okay. So, why so low? Some of you may be thinking this is sort of a low number. You'd be right if you consider the fact that the game is next to free. And usually talks like this one come to the conclusion that the game was poorly marketed or hardly advertised at all. I'm here to say that I did do some marketing, or rather what little I could afford. I made some ads and videos for Facebook. You can see that I spent $263 across 6 campaigns. I even targeted advertising at conventions I couldn't attend so that Facebook users there would see my video ads. This was somewhat of an effective strategy, but for most of these campaigns, I aborted them before completion as user interaction dropped off. Twitter is a more unfortunate story. Neither of the Twitter campaigns I attempted were completed. The only one that was actually published, I canceled manually halfway through because hardly anyone was watching the video, and I was paying for impressions that weren't creating interaction. I was pretty stingy about this because of all this money that was just coming out of my pocket, and I already knew at that point that the returns would be minimal, which is not that minimal. So if you were to compare these numbers to, say, like Facebook numbers, I was paying way less for a Facebook ad that was getting twice the amount of interactions and 3-second video watches. So take that as you will. Okay, we get it. You lost money. Selling a game is hard. And I'm guessing a couple people are already sick of that discussion of losing money. Games are expensive. This is not a mystery. But I promised you 3 lessons, and I'm going to get to those.
This is much cheaper than a gambling habit, though.
It is gambling. But essentially what I'm saying here is that there are some things I did that no one should do, and perhaps you may not have considered those things. So, what is Breakout? That's simple. A story-driven arcade experience aimed at players who are familiar with NIT computing and the history of microprocessor, who are interested in alternate history and science fiction as well as nostalgia, or perhaps looking to learn more about computers or are currently studying them and want an alternate view that leans heavily toward myth and reality and provides an effective way to the actual state of computing and AI in the future that it was imagined with the forefathers of processor architecture, while also providing a gameplay blending honor system with old school sensibilities that will attract old players to the game who will recognize elements of the story from their own experiences with Commodore, Atari, or DOS systems that are more popular in the mid-80s and early 90s, and maybe also be familiar with the little man, the computer myth that children were often subject to in order to learn how computers are worked out. Well, system and the understanding of the plot that is otherwise rather difficult to decipher without extensive knowledge of the subjects discussed within the assigned material. Did you get it? So.
Nice elevator pitch.
Yeah, but no, see, this was my elevator pitch. That's the problem. So the first step to failure, never learn how to describe your game. Just never learn. Never learn how to say it effectively. Here are some examples of myself failing to explain what my game is. So this is the landing page for all of the advertisements. So if you click through, this is where it take you. You may notice that it is poorly formatted. But it also has some jarring red text that's like crying for help. I thought describing the arcade portion of Breakout and throwing these in would help raise curiosity in readers. The thing I failed to realize is that no one reads, unless they really want to. So this just kind of looks bad and is ultimately awkward. This is my Steam page. It looks fine. Most Steam descriptions look something like this. Unfortunately, I thought this was a great place to build universe rather than actually explain the game. I also made the odd decision to remind people that they would play the game the way I wanted them to play, or else play at their own risk. You can see it. I say something about using keyboard controls rather than mouse controls. Yeah. So essentially, yeah, you don't want to threaten players. So this is my itch.io page. It doesn't explain anything. It expects you to read this long expository thread in the forum, which hardly anyone did. So this brings us to lesson 2. The second step to failure. Try to be clever and you'll look like an idiot. On the early access itch.io page, I kept a log of changes I made to the game. I started this log before itch.io had a developer log feature, so I ended up using the forum to mix results. The average post looks something like this. I talk about some changes I made as well as some spooky things that happened. The idea was to pull the reader into a conspiracy that they felt like they were uncovering one entry at a time. There was a significant problem with this approach. I was completely unable to escape the cringe factor. I was in too deep. These weren't interesting or well written. They were supposed to be valuable to potential players for understanding what they were getting into, but I think it turned more players away than it attracted. There are many other secrets I expected players to find, all a part of an ARG I was trying to get off the ground. This is the Greenlight page that was published in February. Greenlight pages had a feature where you could publish 3D objects that viewers could check out. I figured this was as good a place as any to hide some secrets. So when you clip into the model, you see this. You're supposed to figure out what that was. I'm sure most developers in the room recognize hex as soon as they see it. I never revealed this secret publicly. I showed a couple of friends hoping they would show their friends, and that would move along the chain, but no one ever uncovered it. I even went as far as to hide secrets on the store pages. Does anyone have a guess as to what I hid here? Can anybody figure it out?
A capacitor.
So if you open up the page source, you could find all of the image links. And if you search for the background image, it would return the URL for the looping background. And if you followed the link, it would show you this. And this is the background image without the text that covers it up on the store page. You can see these eyes staring at you, watching you through the thin veneer of your monitor. So I thought that was really cool, but nobody saw it. So after planning those secrets and some others I elected not to show here, I got to work trying to attract users. I spent a couple months having my Twitter get taken over by some strange being. Unfortunately, I again tried to use this opportunity to world build, which meant that it was cryptic as all hell, and ultimately just annoying for most people. I lost a lot of Twitter followers for this.
Did you see this translate from Swedish? Pretty funny.
There was one part that I was proud of, however. I started to build some interesting concepts for the story, like the idea of the Morris call, which was a puzzle nobody figured out. And if you want to figure it out, I have one hint for you, and that is, what is the first computer worm? Okay, so the final step to failure is that you should always make sure you make assumptions, even if it's a little one. So this one may seem obvious, but you have no idea the amount of assumptions you make in an hour. I'm going to show you some that seriously damaged my development cycle that I didn't even realize I was making. If you don't mind, just raise your hand when you see an assumption that you've also made so we can commiserate. This feature is pretty basic. There's probably example code that I can use to write it. Yeah. Okay, a few people. Game X is similar to my game, and it has feature Y. So that will go well in my game. Yeah. So several people. I will have internet access and uninterrupted time. Yep. I'll get to that eventually. Yeah, everybody? If I send a bunch of emails, I'm sure to get at least one back. Yep, a few of you. I can write the story on the fly. It's already in my head anyways. Yeah, a few less, yeah. If I build it, they will come.
Yes.
Yeah, everybody.
Yeah, 2 hands.
They're just waiting for it, right?
So I have a quote that is fake, but if you recognize it, that's 3 points for House Atreides. I want you to say it with me and practice it every night before you go to sleep. I must not assume. Assumption is the mind killer. Assumption is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my assumptions. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the assumption is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Congratulations! You'll never make an assumption ever again. I'm sure.
That's a bold assumption.
So you lose! You learned all 3 of the lessons to failure. Congratulations. And now you'll never unlearn them. But chances are, you were probably already ignoring them. They were already part of your lifestyle. And I didn't notice this until a year after starting development. At that point, it was too late. So now that I've convinced you that I'm a terrible game developer and that I'm a total pessimist and fraud, let me tell you about how making this game was the most enriching experience I've had in my 21 years of life. Let's go back to the beginning. The year 2000, when I first really started playing video games. So my parents both worked at AOL as support personnel. So life in computers was pretty much already decided for me. We were living in Virginia at the time, and I was 5 years old. My gaming equipment at the time was minimal. Just a not that powerful compact desktop and a PlayStation that was basically outmoded at that point since the PlayStation 2 had just come out. My mom wasn't a fan of letting me play games for very long. So I rarely ever got a new game, and of the few games I had to make them last. What helped to give me a glimpse of the outside world of real gaming was a forgotten relic of the era, PlayStation Underground. which was a magazine that published seasonal demo discs called Jam Packs. These were essentially super packed full of demos for games that were out or upcoming. And these weren't just like indie titles, these were like major AAA games. So for me, this was basically like cheap games. So I picked up this exact one on the screen. I picked that up along with Command & Conquer and Dune 2000, I think, at an EB Games in 2000 with my dad. And one game in particular on this pack stuck out to me. Tiny Tank. I can't explain it now, but something stuck out to me about this game. It had this perfect combination of attitude and silliness that was really attractive to my 5-year-old mind. It took a long time to convince my parents to get it for me, but I eventually got a copy mailed to the house. I loved rolling around and blasting stuff, and I laughed at all the stupid jokes. And here's a little gameplay I wanted to show. Since most life, where's my mouse? Did you see it? There it is. Oops, this might be deafening. I have no idea. Oh, God. Oh, it's not even playing. Okay, well, there's no audio. So...
I hear it.
It's coming out of my laptop.
Oh, that's fine.
Here's just the intro sequence. Let's just skip to the opening cutscene.
So what year was this game made?
This was made in 98, released in 99.
Hi, America. Hi, boys and girls. It's me, Tiny Tank. Cue the theme song. Tinky, tinky, clinky, clanky. New from Tetrarch Tiny Tank. America's lovable... Wait. Is that my theme song? Well, it hasn't been finalized yet. Wanky, wanky, tanky, tanky. What the is that? You're being difficult.
So, essentially, Tiny Tank, he's like Sonic, but with a giant cannon, and he's got attitude. So, the gameplay looked like, not like that, not like that, like this. So you had this, you were a tank, you just drove around and shot stuff. That was it. That was the whole game. It was so simple. Unlike most tanks, you could strafe. Just could jump, and you picked up these brains, and the brains made you more powerful. So yeah, I love this game. This was like my favorite game for a really long time. Where am I?
This looks like Robocraft. You know? Yeah, an early version.
Work with me here. Come on. Why isn't my mouse
Stuck in the corner.
Oh, there it is. Jiminy Christmas. Where's the full screen button? There it is. Okay, so I love Tiny Tank. It must have been a hit, right? Surely it was on a level similar to Sonic or Mario. After all, Tiny was a cute killing machine. Everybody knew what I was talking about at school, right? Right? It wouldn't be until much later that I learned that Tiny Tank was a massive flop. The developer, and now Games, was defunct within a year of release, and only made one other game before being completely shut down. Mort the Chicken. I don't know anything about this game, except for that it has some of the worst music I've ever heard. At the time, this was all really terrible news. I was hoping that a Tiny Tank sequel was on the way, and that I may yet see an updated version of Tiny Tank. Then it occurred to me, I had Tiny Tank all to myself. In a way, the fact that the game was poorly received meant that I got to be the one true fan. I would carry on the Tiny Tank legacy in my mind. All of the weird intricacies of the story, all of the stupid catchphrases like Tiny Tank is my slave name, those things were mine now, and no one else had them. And so began my love of terrible, obsolete crap. I fell in love with the idea of cult followings and antique machinery. Here's some photos of the antique crap I have. I brought, there's a Macintosh SE30 back there. I actually bought that in California, and I gutted it because it didn't work, and now it's a monitor. And then I just got that IBM monitor. Actually, I'm going to take that with me on conventions. I brought with me today the VIC-20 USB keyboard which I got online.
That's the whole key.
It used no, unfortunately it doesn't work anymore. But it's got an Arduino in it that makes it a full USB keyboard. It's very neat. So eventually I watched Hackers. Yes, Hackers, the film from 1995, and that changed my life. I loved the faux world they created for the film, where computers seemed to work completely out of line with how they would work in ours. Here's a clip of that.
There's a new virus in the database. What's happening? It's replicating, eating up memory. What do I do? Type cookie, you idiot. I'll head him off at the pass.
I love how the keyboard has like 8 trillion keys.
Log in and avoid files. Run antivirus. Give me a systems display. Die, dickweeds. Rabbit is in the administration system. Send a flu shot.
Rabbit, flu shot, someone talk to me.
A rabbit replicates till it overloads a file that it spreads like cancer.
Cancer?
That's Penn Jillette, yeah. They're trying to stop a tanker from sinking.
The Gibson is finding us too fast.
But look at the display with like the weird 3D like floating around in cyberspace. I love that.
There's too many garbage files. I need more time. They're at Grand Central Station. Lower level. Don't screw up.
Right. So
When was that made?
that was made in came out in '95. It's actually as old as me.
Oh my god.
It's good. There we go.
It's a great movie, and everyone should watch it.
And then you should buy the soundtrack.
Yes,
Second soundtrack.
yes. You should buy the soundtrack and then set your desktop wallpaper to the Zero Cool desktop wallpaper or the Acid Burn one, whatever it was. Anyway, yeah. So that idea of just these like totally bizarre computers that didn't function anything like computers as we know them, really stuck with me. Like Tron. And it stuck with me like throughout all of high school. Actually, it inspired me to write a play. And that play was terrible, and I want to forget about it, but I can't.
Is this about Breakout anymore?
I'm getting there. I'm
I'm real confused.
So flash forward to
I
2015.
guess this is similar to the game, right?
I'm getting there. So I graduated in 2014 from Burlington Technical Center with highest honors and a presidential award of academic excellence. That would be the U.S. president, as in Obama. Unfortunately, I squandered those gifts by skipping college altogether and diving into the workforce. I got a job at Staples as a certified repair tech. So I fixed computers for like little kids and old people for a while. At this point, I was making games for fun and post them to my website. I had little to no social media presence, but I still competed in just about any jam I could in hopes that I would eventually strike gold. It was like the Rovio strategy. Eventually, the Game Theory Game Jam came around, and I was extremely excited to meet up for my first physical jam. So the game I made was Tetrarch App. It wasn't all that dissimilar from the final product, aside from the fact that it was incredibly difficult. Very few people were able to complete a single level due to a brutally narrow resource pool. Blocks only had one hit before they broke. Many kids found the challenge somewhat addicting, and they kept coming back for a second try. Eventually, lines started forming to play, and while the game wasn't very polished, it seemed to grab people's attention with the bright flashing colors. Tetrarch App ended up winning the jam, mostly due to the pure volume of return players. I suspect some kids voted twice as well. It wasn't the most fair competition, and in my opinion, there were far better games there that deserved to win. But I took that win as a sign that I was doing something right. The theme for the jam was either entropy or deprecation or rot. I can't remember off the top of my head. The design I made met 2 pieces of criteria.
Decay.
Oh, decay, was that what it
That
was?
decay.
Decay. Well, this doesn't meet that anymore. But I set 2 pieces of criteria for myself. One, that it was easily attainable in the provided time frame with some additional polish time included. And 2, that it conveyed the sense of the theme through gameplay rather than setting or story elements. I considered buildings that fell apart and decided the feeling of deprecation was more effective if it made gameplay progressively difficult. So I was on an Atari binge at the time, and BRKÖUT seemed an obvious choice for a simple adaptation. Ironically enough, it proved to be anything but. I've never had a physics lesson in my life. So 2-dimensional ball physics were difficult to implement in an equally realistic and active way. I never figured it out. It's still broken in the current version. Oh well. So soon afterward, GMGF rolled around. I was fortunate enough to share a table with Shane, so I could walk around and network some. One of the speakers there made a point of telling people not to make BRKÖUT clones. And I felt a little persecuted, but ultimately it was just funny. Also the computer in the middle there actually had a demo version for a mobile game I was developing that I completely abandoned. It was called BRKÖUT. You can actually play it on Gamejolt. Okay. So after a generally positive reception from the players, I decided to polish the game some. I figured I could have it done in a couple months. With extra levels, call it a day, sell it for a couple bucks. And then I thought back to my childhood. I decided that if I was going to make this thing, I was really going to make it. And I was going to make it on my own terms. It was going to be a love letter to obsolete crap, and was going to scrape at something bigger than I could ever hope to make. I was biting off more than I could chew, and I knew it, and it never felt better. I thought I could handle it. After all, Tetrarch App was my 11th game. So over the next year, I went to work at my own pace, maintaining 2 jobs and traveling around the world occasionally. This chart shows an approximation of how I spent my time in the first year. You'll notice that I spent an irregular amount of time on world building, and that there's no value on the chart for marketing. I did not make any attempts to market at this point, as I figured I would do all of that in the month leading up to release. That was obviously a terrible mistake. When I began to build the world of BRKÖUT, I started with a feeling of ickiness that I wanted to convey. I wanted to give everything a fleshy feeling, to convey that this computer had issues. Its primary issue was that it was built of decaying flesh. I thought about flesh computers. I thought about the Master from Fallout, but he was only a man infused with computer. I was looking for a computer made out of man. None jumped to mind, but for some reason I kept coming back to I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, the Harlan Ellison story and computer game. I got really excited at the prospect of having a character that elicited a similar unwavering hatred of mankind. At the time, the polls were starting to turn up Trump, so I figured I would give it an anti-fascist twist as well. It occurred to me that in a world run by flesh computers, every device is interchangeable and yet also unique. The internet would function in an extremely different capacity. Instead of simply linking resources, it would allow for dynamic resource management in a way similar to how the human mind stores information and creates neural pathways. Potentially, if unchecked, a large-scale network could become a supercomputer, and that supercomputer was already sentient. So these were the tenets of the BRKÖUT universe. From that point on, I developed dialogue and characters that made sense in this world. I decided there would be 2. One was an old man who was dying. Throughout the game, the player would find journals written by him describing his situation. Over time, he would reveal to the player that he was one of the original designers for the flesh computer. He was a Nazi scientist, turned conscientious objector. During the war, he traded Nazi secrets to the US in exchange for citizenship. The second character was the person trapped in your computer. They were angry and inquisitive. They accused the old man of terrible things. They were unforgiving and unwilling to see the old man's point of view. In this situation, there are 2 ways to look at it. You could say that the old man is the antagonist, and you would be right. That would make the person in the computer the protagonist. However, you could also say that the real protagonist here is the player. I really like the idea of making this an experience that the player was having rather than a player character. So how can I make gameplay that represented this world? Since the tenets I listed centered around computer technology, I wanted the game to feel like you were exploring an old computer and running programs to see what they were. That sense of exploration was supposed to carry the player through the game, to see where the breadcrumbs led. I provided a narrator who pushed the plot along with their own hidden agenda that wouldn't be revealed until the very end of the game. This narrator would eventually lead the player to the truth of the situation, but only after earning their trust. If the player was obedient, they would be trusted and progress through the game. And at the end, like any good narrative experience, there would be multiple endings that reflected the player's attentiveness to the plot. At the end of the day, however, I ended up axing one of these tenets due to how much more work it would be. It simply would have been too hard to implement a trust system with what I was working with at the time. If I had been more organized at the beginning of development, then perhaps that would have changed. I hardly wrote anything down, and it proved to be my undoing many times. So I stole an idea from Five Nights at Freddy's and put in expository minigames. At first it was just an Easter egg, but then I realized that if I wanted to sell the idea of being trapped in a computer, one would imagine that a computer had more than one game on it. The first was an Easter egg based on Adventure for the 2600. You had a 4-directional character who wandered around and saw things. You collected keys and activated buttons to get to new rooms with new stories. The second game never had a real name, but the file is just called Walking. You play as a representation of the old man as he wanders around his apartment. Later on, you go to another apartment across the hall, which was a reference to the first diary entry in the game. Neither of these games stood on their own. They needed to be part of a larger experience. BRKÖUT provided the perfect opportunity to showcase more work than just a bunch of falling bricks and flashing colors. It seemed like a great idea at the time, and it definitely attracted folks to the game once they learned of their existence. The second year of development, I slowed down a significant amount. I started missing goals more frequently and focused more on the marketing attempts I described at the beginning of the video, or the talk. As it turns out, I wasn't very good at it, but it was a very valuable learning experience. Content production slowed to a crawl for a few months, then saw a quick rise as I approached the deadline I set for myself in September. Some of the best work on the game was completed in that short period. I was demonstrating to myself how much I had learned after 2 years of bashing my head against this project. When it was finally done, I remember feeling more relieved than excited. I was relieved that I wouldn't be sorting out my old and buggy code anymore, that from here on out I would be writing cleaner and more professional work. I wanted to sleep more than anything, but I simultaneously felt like I hadn't earned it yet. There was so much more I wanted to do that I never made concrete. I'm proud of myself for finishing, but I have many regrets regarding the design and execution of the entire game. Things I failed to mention but should. So Simon made this game feel the way it does. Simon's right here. Simon Wagg, my brother. His musical direction helped me to shape the scene to be more effective. He deserves way more credit than he gets here. People should hire him for stuff. Just saying. This entire time, I was literally living in my mother's basement, just to avoid paying rent, other basic living fees. This helped me to find money for advertising and paying folks for contributions. And one last thing here that's really important. I was a major slacker and left so much for later. So much of the stress that I felt towards the end was completely self-produced, just because of how much I procrastinated. This is the issue that any one-man team deals with, and you should never underestimate it. So in the end, what were the most valuable bits of knowledge I learned from this experience? Ultimately, nothing I learned is of much particular value to anyone other than myself. This journey was always one of self-improvement, and I feel as if I have achieved that goal with flying colors. I work as a developer professionally now, thanks to my experience making this game. So I suppose if you were to attempt a similar journey to this one, here are some tips to make the most of it. Whoops. Well, the first one, failure is the greatest teacher in all things. Anyone can tell you that, but I will tell you it again because it's extremely true. Second lesson, be generous with yourself. You will need time to adjust to the project you are working on and all of its layers. You will never understand something before you build it. Very few people can visualize the exact final product before they write anything. And the third lesson, comparing yourself to others is a waste of time you could be spending learning something they don't know. You're not competing with anyone other than yourself and the clock. Meeting your goals is the greatest competition of all. If you're building for yourself, there is no need for stress. When you introduce other people and then you give them expectations, you create stress for no reason other than to up your stakes once your project is complete. This is probably the most likely thing that will cause you to fail. And ultimately, that's it. That's all I have to offer. This game was never meant to be a commercial success. I just decided to attempt to make it that way. Because how else are you going to learn if you don't fail? And so I failed. I think I failed pretty spectacularly. Thank you very much. That was about 35 minutes, so I got plenty of time for Q&A. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead, Scott.
Did you do any like contacting press for marketing, like press releases and stuff?
Yeah, so the question was whether I did any contacting press. Yes, I did. I contacted all of the local news outlets. I contacted multiple game journalists. First I went through just basic tips lines, and then I went to specific journalists. 0 responses. So it's possible that I write terrible emails, or it's also possible that I just didn't write enough. I read somewhere that it's better to be annoying than to be, well, no, I mean, there's probably truth in this. It's better to be annoying, because eventually someone will read it. And if they see something they like, you know, maybe they'll want to talk to you. But for the most part, nobody wanted to talk to me at all.
Did you do any world building in these emails?
No, the emails made it very clear what the game was. I wish I had one to show you, but I don't, unfortunately. Go ahead.
Were you contacted on Steam by a lot of people asking for free keys to do a review of your game? And how did you deal with that?
Simple. All of them were bots. So I received keys from, I want to say maybe 20 to 30 emails requesting keys. That was in the first couple weeks after launch on Steam. And once I started getting those, I was like, okay, you know, the game's almost free. I should just give out keys. But then I thought, you know, that's a bad habit to get into. Because one day, that's not how you want to build a loyal audience. That's just handing out keys. And I knew those keys were just going to go be resold somewhere else. So for most of these Twitch accounts, they will give you, they'll give you their username. Just go look at what games they play. Chances are you're making a game as an independent developer. Do they play indie games? Are they playing like PlayerUnknown's Battleground like for half an hour once a month? No, they're not going to play your game on their stream. They just want it to resell somewhere in case it actually has value. And it's just a bot gamble. That's all it is. So for the most part, most of those I completely ignored. I did send a couple to people who actually were playing indie games. I sent one to Jupiter Hadley. She actually did a video, and she's actually up to win an award from some big media company. She covers tons of indie games, like thousands in a year. She's incredible. She covered it both in the alpha and then nearing completion, and that was pretty awesome. But otherwise, basically no media coverage at all, even though I reached out. Yeah, go ahead.
So if you were to start a new game, how would you world build differently?
No if, no if.
When you do.
I've already started my new game.
There you go.
I'm always starting a new game. Yeah, so how would I world build differently? I would write it down and never lose it. So I actually wrote it down several times. And each time I wrote it down, I just hated it. I would come back to it a month later and hate it. I would say, when you come back to it a month later and you hate it, don't throw it away. Stick to it. I mean, if you thought it was good at one time, you have to really evaluate. Maybe show it to a friend. Show it to someone else who isn't you, that doesn't have, you know, a super critical view on the work. And just show it to them, you know, ask them if it's terrible. They'll probably say, no, it's fine. And then, you know, you have to figure out what that means.
That's good.
But for the most part...
Why are you lying to me?
Yeah, they will. They'll absolutely lie to you, and that's fine. Otherwise, they'd be terrible friends. But ultimately, I wouldn't change the process of world building. I would just change how I recorded it. For instance, the game started that initially there was only going to be one character. It was going to be a guy stuck in a computer, and he was just going to be angry and mean to you the whole time, and you were going to have to like fight him. then I discovered that that's just wouldn't have been interesting unless I was like a really good character writer, which I wasn't, and I wasn't at the time of writing. I just simply wasn't good writing. So no one would have stuck around for all of that. So I went with something that was more interesting. I had two characters with different points of view, and that was more varied.
Right.
Any other questions? Cool. Well, thanks a lot, you guys. This group has been like super invaluable to the production of this game. I probably would have never made it if this group didn't exist. Overall, just want to thank you guys a lot. So thank you.